Whole, half, and quarter notes. When reading sheet music, it's not only important to pay attention to what note you should be playing, but how long you should hold it out for. Although there are 7 different notes in a scale, any of these can be held out for different lengths of time. There are actually quite a few different types of note length, but here we'll just talk about the 3 most common. First, before we begin, let's define the term beat. You can think of a beat as a second in time. So if a song takes 60 seconds to listen to, it might consist of 60 beats. However, the difference is that beats can change in length depending on the song. For instance, if a song sounds really slow and mellow, each beat might actually equate more to 2 or 3 seconds. But in fast and upbeat songs, a beat might be closer to 1 second or even half a second. Now you might be asking yourself, if beats can change in value, what's the point of them at all? The point of beats is to keep the rhythm in a song consistent. They just give you something to count in small increments to keep your pace, like counting your strokes in swimming or your strides in running. They simply help you keep the same pace throughout. Just a tip, in all these examples we'll be assuming that we're in 4/4 time because that's the most common. Whole notes. You can remember that a note is a whole note in 2 ways. 1, it looks like a whole. 2, it will take up the whole measure. Whenever you see a whole note, play whatever note it is and hold it out while you count to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You have to remember, though, to start counting at the very moment you play the note. Don't play it and then start counting a second later, because that defeats the purpose of counting. The whole idea is that we can consistently and rhythmically count to 4 over and over again. As you can see in the picture above, the whole notes fall directly on the ones, and the spacing between the numbers is consistent. This is how all music should be counted. Half notes. If a whole note takes up a whole measure, I bet you can guess what a half note does. Because of this, all half notes consist of 2 beats. So if there are 4 beats in each measure, you can play a half note on the first and third beats of each. Again, the counting begins precisely when the note is played. Visibly, you can recognize a half note by the stem and the hollow note head. It basically looks like a whole note with a stick attached. Although it's not shown in the example below, remember that if a note head is placed more than halfway up on the staff, the entire note gets flipped around, meaning the stem goes on the left instead of on the right and points down instead of up. Quarter notes. A quarter note is the same as a fourth of a whole note or half of a half note. Each quarter note only gets 1 beat, and thus it's the most commonly used type of note. That means that you can play a quarter note for every number that you count. The visible features of a quarter note include a filled-in note head and a stem. The properties of the stem position are the same as with half notes. If the note head is placed more than halfway up on the staff, the stem goes on the left and points down. Otherwise, it's always on the right and points up. At this point, the division of notes might be starting to get confusing. So here's a diagram of how they all split up. Whenever we have a smaller note value, it is exactly half of the bigger note. A whole note splits in half to make 2 half notes. And each half note splits in half to make 2 quarter notes. Of course, we can and eventually will go smaller than that, but that's where it can start to get really confusing, so we'll leave that for another lesson.